After years of brutal fighting in Ukraine, it's looking like peace might be on the horizon. But whether or not that's achieved, one thing is certain: Vladimir Putin is in deep trouble. Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. Before I begin, YouTube has really been clamping down on this channel, refusing to notify you about new episodes. So let's show YouTube we've got engagement by leaving a comment with an American flag emoji. Or maybe some little Russian and Ukrainian flags shaking hands. Or just a bunch of bombs and explosions. Let's see who wins. Now, on to the news. Over the past few days, President Trump held a meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin and another with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky and a host of European leaders. Now, in both meetings, the mood was positive. Trump was able to reach out and bond with leaders on both sides, not over shared goals or a vision for the future, but with something far more important: things they hate. Like Joe Biden.
Today, when President Trump is saying that if he was the president back then, there will be no war. And I'm quite sure that it would indeed be so. I can confirm that.
And don't forget the most despicable group of all: journalists.
President Zelensky, you look fabulous in that suit.
I said the one that attacked you last time.
Yes, Zelensky.
In the same suit. You see, I changed, you are not.
Isn't that beautiful? Truly, I say, blessed be the haters. Now, most of these talks have been kept private, and peace in Ukraine is by no means certain. But a few key details have come out, and they've changed the entire picture. At the Alaska summit, Putin laid out the bare minimum he'd need in order to negotiate a peace deal. Specifically, he needs the Donbas. That's this region here. Now, at this point in the war, Russia also controls all of this, here, about a fifth of Ukraine. Putin offered to freeze this southern front, which is still up for negotiation. But even if Russia pulled out of these regions entirely, he'd still need to keep this. And apparently, Trump is on board. What makes these regions so special is that Donbas, along with Crimea, are the most heavily Russian-speaking parts of Ukraine. These were areas where armed pro-Russian groups attempted to break away back in 2014 when Russia first started its military intervention in Ukraine. If Putin agreed to leave the Donbas, that would just be total defeat for Russia. The billions of dollars spent, crippling sanctions, social unrest, and hundreds of thousands of soldiers lost or wounded would all count for nothing. If that happened, Putin's career would be over, and he could be the one taking a short trip out of a glass window. But even if the Donbas stays with Russia, that's still a pretty crappy prize. The entire region has been gutted by almost a decade of fighting. The Hill points out that from a practical standpoint, the Donbas is something neither side should even want. Rebuilding could cost upwards of $200 billion, more than Ukraine's entire GDP and nearly a tenth of Russia's. And that's not even getting into the demographics of the region. Since 2014, well over 2 million people have fled the Donbas, and those that remain are primarily the elderly and the destitute. This is a huge problem for Russia, which is experiencing a catastrophic decline in its population. Russia is aging fast, and the country's birth rate has plunged to its lowest point in 200 years. So when it comes to repopulating Russia, I'm sorry to say it, but babushka just isn't up to the job. And it gets worse. All of the stuff about territory and who gets what is sort of missing the forest for the trees. See, this was never about slicing off pieces of Ukraine and adding them to Russia. The real goal was regime change. You see, ever since the fall of the Soviet Union, the borders of NATO have been creeping closer and closer to Russia. This made the Kremlin nervous. If Ukraine joined the West's orbit, NATO troops would be right on Moscow's doorstep. That's why at the beginning of the war, Russia made a beeline for Kiev. If they could take the capital and get rid of Zelensky, there was a chance they could stop Ukraine's westward drift. But that offensive stalled out, and Russian troops were forced to turn tail and walk all the way back to Belarus. Today, Zelensky is still in power, and Ukraine staying neutral, let alone joining Russia's sphere, has become virtually impossible. Even if Russia sliced Ukraine in half, taking everything east of the Dnieper, or went even further, making the country landlocked, Putin still wouldn't have achieved his goal. The Ukraine that remained would become a fortress. And that's exactly what's happening. According to Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, Ukraine could receive Article 5-like security guarantees. This was Russia's fear all along, but apparently they had no choice but to accept. In exchange, Ukraine offered to buy upwards of $100 billion worth of American military assets. And Trump floated the idea of using American air support as part of that deal. Even if Ukraine agreed to never join NATO, it honestly wouldn't make that much of a difference. Ukraine would be armed to the teeth and would continue to have the West's full backing. And that's on top of the recent addition of Sweden and Finland to the NATO alliance, a direct result of the war. All in all, this whole war has been a disaster for Russia. And the proposed peace isn't looking much better. Putin went in with the goal of keeping Ukraine out of the Western sphere, but all he got was a chunk of territory decimated by war, a wrecked economy, and a mountain of corpses. So he could try and save face by claiming he took on the collective West and fought them to a standstill. But if Russian elites aren't convinced, well, that face might just have its next meeting with a plate glass window. What do you think? Leave your comments below. And if you want to support the work we do, head over to AmericaUncovered.tv. There, you'll always get updates on our recent episodes, access to exclusive deep dives, and a chance to talk with me and the team. That's AmericaUncovered.tv. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thank you for watching America Uncovered.